So far, nothing too exciting, just standard fold hands. No reason to get too creative with the short stack with any of these hands. So, yeah. In the previous video, I was a little concerned by some of Baligal's preflop inconsistencies. A little bit of calling preflop in spots that didn't quite make sense, and just doing things that were a little inconsistent, calling with some garbage hands and then folding in basically the same spots with better hands. In this spot, I think this is a really good spot with Jack 10 to shove over the limper. It's unlikely that the limper's limping too strong there, and Jack 10's a pretty strong hand, and it's a really good spot to try and pick up a nice amount of chips. I think that would have been a good shove spot there with the Jack 10. Certainly not a slam dunk or something that you have to do by any means, but I do think it's a good spot to pick. But nothing egregious by any means. With Queen 5 off there in the small blind, that's definitely a shove. With about 11 blinds, when it folds around to you, Queen high is definitely good enough to go with there. I would be going with a lot of hands worse than Queen 5. Probably, I would only really be folding some of the worst hands, like the Deuce 5s and like maybe like 8-3 and stuff like that. But I think Queen 5 off is definitely a shove there, and it seems you don't want to get too tight on the short stack and get scared to bust, because it's important to keep trying to chip up in spots where it's plus EV to shove, so that this is definitely a shove, so that you can, when you do actually pick up a hand and you want to reshove against someone, you actually have fold equity. And so yeah, you don't want to be playing too tentative when you're on the short stack. Wow, that's an ugly hand. The guy called the re-raise with King 10 off and then flopped an open-ender and called it off and then got there on the turn. Pretty ugly way to lose there for Graf Zahill. But yeah, earlier Bali was playing a little too loose and a little strange in some spots. So far, now that he's gotten short stacked, I think he's playing a little too tight, but for the most part, I can't fault him for too many of the plays. I think there's a couple shove spots that he missed, but overall, I think the short stack play has been a little better than the play early in the previous video. Here with Ace-Jack suited, I think you have to go ahead and go all in. It's definitely now that there's a call. I don't like calling along with that short stack. I think there's a lot of money in there. You could easily have the best hand, and I think that calling the min-raise there is a big mistake, especially with the caller in the small blind, who's, we've already seen, is calling pretty loose there because of the King 10 off. I think that Ace-Jack suited has enough equity to where you have to go ahead and shove it in there. And I don't, I think even if the small blind hasn't called, I think that you would have to go ahead and put it in. It wouldn't be quite as much of a slam dunk, but I think that it's a good enough hand to where you got to go with it. And I think that those little mistakes, although they seem little, they end up adding up in these tournaments long term, and it's important to not play over aggressive, but also not be afraid to bust when you're on a short stack.